Good afternoon, it's Jackson with St. Louis Wood Floors. Today I just wanted to go over whether or not you're able to sand and finish your wood floors. And what I'm going to go over in this video is more along the lines of like the thickness of the wood floor, like is there enough there for you to actually be able to sand and refinish the floor. I did another video where I went over is the quality of the floor good enough so far as like pet stains and things like that. But this one I wanted to specifically go over whether or not you can sand and finish the floors so far is there enough meat on the floor. So basically in hardwood floor finishing, there's a general rule where if you start to see the nail heads that you're now too deep into the floor to be able to sand and finish the floor again. So I've run into it where people are told that their floor is too thin and they can't sand and finish it because, well, you can see these nail heads. And where this is a good rule of thumb, it can be misleading. Like, when they used to install floors by hand, a guy could make an error and put in a nail too high on the board, on the where the tongue is, and then that nail prematurely shows up so far as when you're sanding and finishing it. Likewise, when you're installing with pneumatic tools, every once in a while, the wrong air pressure will go into the cylinder of the nailer and the nail won't set all the way down. So you can hit a few nails and make it appear like the floor is too thin, but what you want to do is really see, is this the majority the case, or is there an area, like there can be high spots in a floor which cause that part of the floor to get sanded more aggressively just due to settling of the house. So you use that as a rule of thumb. But another trick that I use is I usually go to like a floor vent and I will pick up the metal rim vent and then look at the vent and see how much meat is on the wood there. Now, that being said, this can also be slightly misleading because the vent is right next to the wall. It's not out in the main walk areas of the floor. So if the floor is rather old, the main traffic areas are where a majority of the sanding is going to get done, because that's where the majority of the damage to the wood floor could also be done. So these are all just rules of thumb, and you have to take it where you're looking at the overall view of the floor rather than just single indicators in the floor. So when you have a solid wood floor, you have to take all of these things into account and see whether or not there's enough thickness there. Recently, the Wood Flooring Business magazine had an article about this, and I was reading it and I was going, this is a really good thing to cover with my customers. The main reason why you don't want to sand a floor if it's getting too thin is for a number of reasons. One is if you use a water-based finish, if the groove side of the board, where there's the tongue and then there's the groove, if that groove, the top groove side, gets sanded too thin, then what's going to happen is that water-based finish has water in it, so it's going to cause that to curl. So you can see this curling occur in a wood floor that's being finished with water-based and the floor is too thin. Another thing that can happen is that same edge of the board will start to crack and break and fall off. Now that again is also just a rule of thumb too, because you can have full thickness boards start to crack and break and come off because the board is loose and is rubbing up against, moving up and down against that tongue, and then that tongue breaks it. So there's just a number of things that you have to look at as to whether or not your floor can be refinished or if it's getting too thin. Majority of the time where we run into this is with particularly the 3/8 inch and 1/2 inch thick wood floors that were prevalent in the early 1900s. They are referred to a lot as depression wood, and they use that term to indicate the Great Depression in the 30s, where they became heavily prevalent because they could produce a hardwood floor cheaper. Less material means more floor per log, which means that they can charge less for it. So it gets referred to a lot as depression wood, but really they started producing those floors earlier in the 1900s and the 1910s, and then came on through the 30s into the 40s, and then they kind of phased out in the late 40s, early 50s, where now we had the all of the GIs coming back home from World War II, building a lot of homes, a lot of mass-produced homes got done in that time period. America wanted to show that it had recovered from the Great Depression, so they started making the full thickness or 3/4 inch thick oak floors again, and then they started to become more prevalent from then on. And it really takes a good amount of sanding to get through a solid thickness 3/4 inch floor. I've seen them sanded 5 or 6 times, and they're still got life in them. It really depends also on how aggressive they get sanded as well, though, I have to say that. Now, the other family of wood floors that can get over sanded are engineered floors. So engineered floors have a veneer on the top, and I think I covered this a little bit in my previous video, and sometimes those are, you know, 1 millimeter thick, 2 millimeters thick, and really you can't do a lot of sanding on it until it gets up to the 4 millimeter type thickness. And then you can start seeing that it can survive multiple sandings. So these are things just to be aware of and help you answer that question, like, is my floor, you know, able to be resanded?